My name is John Passfield, and the title of this reading will be John and Mother Goose Video 15, John's Reaction to Mother Goose, Part 1. Here is my novella, John and Mother Goose, The Carnival of Tales. John and Mother Goose on the cover surrounded by mythical characters who are the nursery rhyme characters. While driving his granddaughter home from daycare, John suddenly finds himself standing in the midway of a carnival of Mother Goose fairy tales. He's greeted by Jack of Jack and Jill fame, who tells John that Mother Goose is expecting him, as she has a role for him to play. But what does Mother Goose want? Why does she think John is a writer of detective novels? And why, when she meets John, does she greet him as almost a long-lost son? And for that matter, why do so many of the fairy tale characters have different stories that they want John to write for them instead of the ones in which they lived for hundreds of years? John is not a mythical character. He's only a human after all. But can he save the Mother Goose Carnival? Can he solve the mystery of the vanishing fairy tales? Well, I'm not sure whether John is the same character in each of the John and novellas. Now, I say John and novellas. Here's the first one, John and Santa, the cowboy shirt. John meets the mythical character Santa Claus and talks with him. Here's another one, John and Dickens, a Christmas mystery, a picture of Charles Dickens and his characters with John meeting them. So John meets Charles Dickens and talks with him. There others are written but not yet published. So in the John and novels, is John always the same character? I seem to write about John intuitively as I'm writing the novellas, and then I suppose I don't care to ask myself the question and look for evidence because I don't want to limit myself to presenting John as a one or two element character in future novellas. However, I would say that in this novella, John and Mother Goose, even though John is surprised that Mother Goose claims him as almost a long-lost son and assumes that John is the writer of detective novels, John does not challenge her. John does not challenge her, but simply goes along with her plans for him, which are to stroll along the midway of the Mother Goose Carnival of Tales and watch the mythicals perform their plays, to let Mother Goose introduce John to a number of the mythicals, and then to sit with each of the mythicals in the character tent and ask them questions about the missing nursery rhyme characters. So he goes along with all of this. So let's have a look at the first few chapters of John's reaction to this very strange situation. In chapter 2, which we'll look at first, John speaks to Mother Goose on page 10. So let's find it. Here we are. So John speaks to Mother Goose. Now, he doesn't challenge her and say this isn't true. I'm not a writer of detective novels and so on. I'm a little old for fairy tales, but I remember them from my youth. I've known you anywhere, Mother Goose, though Jack I wouldn't have known. Now, was it the beanstalk or the candlestick? Boys named Jack, I recall, seemed to people the fairy tales. I have 3 wonderful grandchildren, and perhaps you already know. They grow up singing nursery rhymes. They learn them at home and at school. I didn't know there was a carnival. This whole scene is a big surprise. Reminds me of the days when I was a boy. The farmer's field, the tents, the stages, the curious crowds. These stories, I'm sure, go back through eons of time. I don't know how I got here, but there's some questions I'd like to ask, if you don't mind. Well, also in chapter 2, John thinks to himself. It's almost time for Jack's performance, so that leaves Mother Goose and I. We continue along the midway, a small crowd at every stage. The humans don't seem to see us. Only the characters see Mother Goose and say hello. Jack said he had something to tell me. I wonder how long I'll get to be here. I assume I'll get to talk with him again. I can't see anything but farm fields. Cars in a parking lot? None I can see. Is the clothing from different eras? Different centuries, it seems to me. People don't seem to notice one another. It's for sure they don't notice me. It's as if I've gone back and I'm having a childhood dream. Well, that was chapter 2 with John speaking to Mother Goose and then John thinking to himself. Let's look at chapter 3, page 19, where he does the same two things. First he speaks to Mother Goose and then he thinks to himself. Excuse me. I'm sorry to hear about all your troubles, Mother Goose. I'd like to apologize. I've known about you since I was a little boy. However, I've been insensitive. I've had a one-dimensional mind. I've never thought of you as composed of more than your public persona. Life for you has been quite difficult, and I have been totally unaware. All this time you've been struggling, a swimmer calling for aid, while I have been making sandcastles and didn't know. Excuse me again. And then John thinks quietly to himself, well, all thought is quiet, I guess. My wife and I were in Sarasota, that was many years ago. We toured the circus world in the winter time. Elephants and lions and tigers, tightrope walkers and acrobats, but there was nothing about Mother Goose and her nursery rhymes. Should I tell her that I've been there? Don't want to accuse her of telling a lie. And why does she say that I'm a detective? A detective who also writes books. And how do I tell her that I don't have a clue about solving her crimes? Excuse me again, my throat is very dry. Okay, let's go to chapter 5, which will be on page 35. When John has learned more from Mother Goose and from Jack as well, and he speaks this time to Mother Goose again. Well, how well do you know Jack, Mother Goose? How well do you know Jill? Do you feel you have the pulse of the enterprise? You've been together now for centuries. Medieval children chanted these verses. Things are bound to get rusty or stale. Do the characters come to you with their problems? Do they come to your tent and confide? Would they tell you if they were unhappy in their roles? Okay, so he says that to Mother Goose. Then he thinks to himself, Mother Goose doesn't seem to hear me. She hasn't acknowledged a word I have said. She just keeps watching the plays on the stages. Once in a while she speaks to me. I'm trying to tell her about the characters, how they seem to feel so restrained. Have they told her the stories they're eagerly telling to me? Jack hears me, and Mother Goose doesn't. At least not when I warn her of Jack. There's something going on that I don't understand. Well, that's part 1. And here's a note about that. Part 1 of John's reaction to Mother Goose. I'm 78 years old as I read these passages. In my 20s, I wanted to be a writer of plays, of poetic plays, in fact. So I went to the public library and they borrowed all kinds of books on how to write plays. This would be in the 1960s. Many of the books were from much earlier in this century, the 20th century that was. Many of them were about how to write popular plays for Broadway and the West End. But I think that a lot of the writers of these playwriting manuals fancied themselves as telling future readers how to write plays that these play manual writers would consider to be serious literature. One of the most common elements which these play manual writers insisted on was that the main character of a play should be a dynamic character, that the main character of every play should be an action creator, should be a character who seizes hold of the action and causes the various stages of the plot to take place. Well, I never did become a writer of plays, or at least not a writer of successful plays, whether popular or serious, but I have become a writer of novels and novellas. So it's interesting to me to read passages in this novella and reflect that I seem to be breaking a cardinal rule of writing, at least according to the self-styled experts whom I read in my 20s. When I have a character who does not seize hold of the action and cause the plot to happen, but who goes along with the plot that another character is causing to happen, while he, John, tries to figure out the implications of the plot that is unfolding before his very eyes. More than that, I don't care to say, except this reading has been part one of John's reaction to Mother Goose's situation. Perhaps John will change from what the playwriting manual writers would call a passive character, but I would call a contemplative character, and seize the day, take control of the plot in part two. So we'll have to wait and see whether John goes from contemplative or passive to active. This is my novella, John and Mother Goose, The Carnival of Tales. It's found on Amazon. Where there's more information, it's found on rocksmillspress.com, which is my publisher's website. More information there on my website, johnpassfield.ca. There's 2 free books, the Planning Notebook and the Reflective Journal. You get them free on your screen for reading if you just click on the cover icon. So if you're interested in all the topics that such a book causes me, a writer, to think about while I'm planning and writing it and while I'm polishing it, then have a look at johnpassfield.ca. Lastly, I'll just say thank you for watching this video.